Hello, friends, and welcome to Ask a Virginia Woman, the show where we talk about power, policy, and life with the women who are moving the Commonwealth forward. I'm Judy Selzer. I'm co founder of two sister organizations, the Virginia Women's Foundation and Virginia Women's Voices. And each week, I sit down with bold, brilliant women from across Virginia, and together we turn up the volume on leadership, equity, and courage, one woman's story at a time. On our show, we talk with CEOs, community organizers, lawmakers, entrepreneurs, educators, and more. And we ask the questions that matter about how did they get here? What challenges are they tackling? And what advice do they have for the rest of us? So today, I'm so thrilled to be joined by Virginia State Senator Barbara Favola, a longtime champion for women, children, and families, and quite frankly, everybody across Virginia. Senator Favola represents the 40th District and has spent over a decade in the General Assembly fighting for policies on everything from healthcare and reproductive rights to education and a wide gamut of social justice issues. And her leadership has really helped shape key legislation and bring critical resources to Northern Virginia and beyond. So today we're going to talk with her about her journey into public service, the battles she's fought and won in the Senate, and what keeps her grounded and inspired. Because when our country and the Commonwealth are facing big questions, sometimes the best thing to do is ask a Virginia woman. And so that's what we're here today to do, Senator. We want to ask you all about your philosophy on leadership and public service and just learn from you. I'm just so honored to talk with you. So let's dive in. Tell us a bit about yourself and how you ended up in the state Senate fighting these really big, important fights.
Judith, that's a great question, and thank you for having me on your show. I'm sure you have a wide viewership, a wide listening audience, and I'm delighted to be able to have a conversation that maybe might be meaningful to a few people out there. Um, well, I started in politics, I guess, like many people have, with a very personal issue. I always knew I wanted to work in public service. I did get my master's in public administration from NYU, the Wagner School. And then I started as a presidential management intern. It's now that presidential
Mhm.
fellow program. So I worked in the federal space, federal Department of Health and Human Services, did work in Congress as a staffer. But, as you progress, I got married and had a child. And I knew that my son had a slight learning disability
Mm.
when he was a preschooler. So it was about the time where lots of school systems were beginning to more robustly implement the IDEA law.
Yeah.
So I decided to get involved in the Arlington Public School advocacy space. And, I got myself appointed to committees and it really helped shape the IEP process in Arlington County. So I garnered a lot of supporters along the way because it was an issue that parents felt very strongly
Yeah.
about and should, because you want to ensure that your child gets an education that will enable he or she to succeed. So that's what sort of drew me into politics. The electoral side of it. I was going to run for the school board, but the first seat that opened in Arlington County was on the county. So that started in 1997. I was elected, and I served on the county board through 2011. And
Mm.
in 2011, I won my Senate seat and started serving in 2012 in the Senate. So I really had a very solid base. People had observed my governance style. They knew I was collaborative,
Yeah.
but very focused on defining the problem so we could come up with a solution where a majority of folks on both sides of the aisle could live with. Because at the end of the day, if people understand there is a problem, then everybody's constituents are affected by that problem. So you're more likely to gain consensus for a solution.
And it's inspiring to hear that there was something personal to you, right? You were a mom just trying to make the world a bit better for your child and ended up being able to make it better for so many children across the community. How did you go about that? I mean, at the time, did you understand what you were embarking upon in this journey, or was this just like, hey, I gotta fix this thing for my kid, or did you have this bigger vision? How does one like
Oh,
start
I
to
see.
lean into leadership in that way?
That's a great question. Well, I was pretty determined to fix this for my son and for other
Yeah,
children, but I was also determined to learn the process.
yeah,
I really wanted to understand how to move the needle with a school system. Okay, so you work with the school board, but you also, have to influence the data that the school administrators are collecting.
yeah,
You also need to talk to the teachers in the space where they're delivering the special ed services. So, I really understood or maybe began to understand the value of hearing all the stakeholder groups and getting their perspective. And then figuring out how can you craft something that, the stakeholders can buy into, but may require some change
yeah,
because in effect, things aren't working as well as they should be. But at the end of the day, I think folks who are working in a space where they care and they're committed, they're willing to take on change. They want to be as effective as possible. They want to solve the problem they were, charged with solving. And, sometimes it's a question of resources, sometimes it's a question of changing the process, sometimes it's a question of getting other people to the table. And being able to figure out those sort of steps was extraordinarily helpful. And then, there's some nuts and bolts things that sometimes get overlooked. I didn't realize I had a lot of organizational skill.
yeah,
So that was nice. I was really great at, keeping contacts and figuring out who the resource people were and staying in touch with people and communicating. I was really good at just keeping people updated. I mean, even folks who may be inclined to disagree with you, if you continue to communicate with them, that's a good thing too. And
yeah.
sometimes you're going to persuade them. So there are a lot of sort of nuts and bolts kinds of skills that you really need if you're going to enter electoral politics, where you're, talking to voters and you need to ensure you get a certain number of votes to win your seat.
There's so many important threads here I'm hearing from your story around leadership. Collaboration, right? Listening, being open minded and willing to keep the conversation going even when you disagree. Were those values of collaboration and listening and talking to folks who see the world a little bit different from you, were those pieces that you were really conscious of, or did it just get developed along the way? Because I mean, those seems like really key pieces of what has allowed you to be successful and make a difference in the world around you.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. It may have been a combination of both.
Yeah.
I think part of it was my natural inclination, my natural work style, but I certainly had to hone those skills.
Yeah.
And I began to see their value, more, brightly than I had maybe understood in the past. So, um, in leadership, it really is a combination of, representing a large number of stakeholders and getting them on the same page, which is very different from being, say, a staff analyst
Yeah.
where, um, say in the federal government, I certainly, listened to the national stakeholder groups in the health area that I was working in. But at the end of the day, the analysis was my analysis.
Yeah.
So, certainly it was influenced, but I had the opportunity or the luxury or the charge, if you will, of just bringing my own expertise to the issue, and somebody else was weighing the views of all the
Yeah.
stakeholders. But if you're in fact the decision maker and you need to come up with a policy that will be adopted or accepted or widely implemented, then you have to, find that common thread, which oftentimes the common thread is really just a different way of expressing the same problem or the same issue.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Because sometimes it's just the narrative around it, right?
Right.
Reshaping the narrative and the language used to help folks realize they actually have more in common on this than they realized. It doesn't have to be so divisive.
Right, they're just
Yeah.
talking about it differently, and so, so I was very good at that. I was very good at understanding if people were saying the same thing, just saying it differently, if they were, able to get on the same page. So that was a skill I think I really honed when I delved into that advocacy role
Yeah.
in the school space.
Well,
But it helped me immensely, being a local leader on the Arlington County
yeah.
Board and then, in the state senate.
Well, and that is a unique skill, right? To be able to truly listen to others around you and understand their values and what's important to them, and then try to thread some commonality across it. But sometimes that's just not possible. Sometimes you do just have to take a fierce
Right.
stand for something that you are really passionate about, even if the rest of the room around you doesn't think it's popular or possible. So there have been a number of moments in your life where you've had to take a really courageous stand on something. Was there a particular moment, early in life or earlier in your career where you think you found those skills to be such a fierce, powerful advocate for your values and what you believe, even if others around you don't think it's popular or possible?
Um, Boy, that really comes out loud and clear in local
Yeah.
government, where, constituents really understand and see your actions as a
Yeah.
local leader every day. Um, well, I know that if I did my due diligence, if I listened to folks, if I met with the folks who disagreed with me and explained my view, listened to them and understood there was going to be some differences, um, then I felt confident that I had done my due diligence and I could, in fact, stand in a space where maybe some other people would not be joining me,
Yeah.
but I knew it was the right thing to do. One thing I've always embraced is if something is particularly controversial and I need to take a stand and I want to take a stand, um, I, in the past, have tried to put elements into my position that would allow a look back at the issue or would allow some rewinding if, in fact, my position was not as effective as I hoped it would be.
Mm,
And that is a tool that people respect, and I always garnered a lot of respect for that. She did what she had to do. I didn't agree with her, but she said, we were going to study the issue, we were going to, reevaluate it, we were going to put some outcome measures in there, and so a lot of people are like, I've got to respect that. She
yeah.
may have, her position might in fact be the right one. We might make the progress that she thinks we're going to make, or maybe we're not, but to be willing to say publicly that you're gonna look at something or do an evaluation of something, I think is a good tool as well.
Wow. So tell me more about that ability to be vulnerable, even as a leader, and say, hey, I've got this bold idea. I want us to move forward on it. But wow, I might actually not have all of the answers here. So we can study this, we can look back at it. What does it take to be a leader who's also, humble and vulnerable like that and willing to say, we can take a look at this and evaluate what parts of it are working and what parts of it might need to evolve alongside, history?
Um, well, and I believe leaders who are willing to do that are really focused on the solution, and they're
Yeah.
not necessarily focused on getting the credit or
Yeah.
owning the solution.
That's the big part of it, isn't it? Right? Putting ego aside and really just doing good stuff for the community.
Right, and making sure that you've got the right answer, and if you don't, then, the problem's still gonna be there, so
Yeah.
then let's try another approach, so I think that's what gives leaders, endurance,
Yeah.
it also enables leaders to build a lot of trust in the community, so, the ability to say, I'm willing to evaluate this in 2 years. I'm willing to put, measurable outcomes in there. And a lot of the measurable outcomes are things that, those who may disagree with your initial position want to see.
Yeah.
So,
Has there been a time that you can think of where you didn't get it all right and you actually learned something really important along the way? I mean, some of our best lessons are when we have a setback and we realize, "Oh gosh, I hadn't thought about that perspective before," or your own perspective just evolves and changes along the way.
yeah, that's interesting. I guess one example would be some of the land use tools we had to implement to allow for affordable housing. Um, I was chair of the Arlington County Board when we approved, and it was one of the first in the country, we approved an affordable housing project above a church sanctuary, right above the church structure. We are an urban community. And because the church owned the land, we could actually designate those units as affordable. But I was bound and determined to go forward, and we did. But we realized through some, so let's just say those who were opposed to having this additional height in their neighborhood, and they filed a lawsuit. We realized that our sector plan was not as clear as it should be. Now,
Mm,
I always thought it was.
yeah,
And maybe it's because, I was involved in adopting it. I knew what we meant. I was confident of what the words meant, but it wasn't as crystal clear as it needed to be. And it wasn't as crystal clear to a judge as we
yeah,
later found out. So we went ahead and we changed the sector plan, but it didn't change the fact that where we were heading was the right place to go.
yeah.
And I was pretty convinced that we had to get there, and if we had to figure out a better process, we were gonna do it.
And sometimes people just don't agree no matter how many times you go back around
That's
something and you try to build consensus and rewrite the words and spend more time collaborating. But how have you kind of navigated these moments of divisive times? I mean, it feels like even 20 years ago we were better able to collaborate across perspective and worldviews. It feels to me harder now. What are you finding is still a successful path for bridging those divides and finding common values and a common path forward?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, going back to that example I just noted, even though we changed the process, there were folks that just did not want height in there. They did not want change.
Hmm.
And part of leadership is managing change. We are in a world that is going to continue to change, and we have to continually figure out where is our best space? Where do we best position ourselves to either advocate for a goal or value or, to implement a program in the best way possible? So you have to continue to, understand your external environment and all the changes that you're going to see. At the end of the day, I said to those who were in opposition to this project that I ran on a set of values that talked about inclusion, talked about equity in the allocation of resources. This
Hmm.
project was near a metro, um, and talked about a number of values that I believed this project represented. And I said, I understand you disagree with me. I respect that, but I really feel that this represents the platform I ran on. And if in fact you can tie your actions back to a set of values that you have always articulated and advocated for, again, I think there's a certain amount of respect there. Folks uh, in all sectors, when I was on the county board and the Senate, um, they get some comfort, whether they agree with you or not, in knowing and sort of predicting what you will do on certain
Hmm.
issues.
Yeah.
She's always voted this way. She knows she wants to go down this path. We don't necessarily agree, but at least it's something we then have to deal with or absorb. And at the end of the day, if folks feel your commitment is so strong and you've stayed loyal to a certain set of values, they end up respecting that. And
Yeah,
you
because
may
there's
win
an
more friends than you think.
authenticity there, right? I mean, you're
Yeah.
not a fair weather friend who's gonna
Right.
change views every time a different, investor comes into the
Right.
world, right? I
Right.
mean, you're an authentic leader who it's clear these are your values, this is what you stand for. You're open and willing to hear all different perspectives on it. But yeah, constituents can understand even if they're not fully in agreement with a particular policy position, they know who you are and they know they can trust that you're really meaningfully trying to make the world for them a bit better.
Right. That's right. That sincerity is a big deal. And so being honest to your values and actually does build trust.
Yeah.
And again, folks in opposition to your views will respect that. So that's worth a lot, I
It's
think.
worth a lot. And yeah, and you've spent a lot of time across your career as well, really lifting up other women's voices. You've helped honor so many through your work, either through the positions that you've taken, the issues you've advocated for, or the others that you've mentored along the way. Why do you believe it's especially important for Virginia women to be leaning into leadership across all different industries? Why is that an important voice to continue to lift up?
Well, first off, women are half of our population.
Yeah,
Um, and they have very different experiences than men, both in growing up and accessing education and accessing career opportunities in balancing the demands of raising a family with professional desires and goals.
yeah,
So it's a very different set of experiences, and the experiences of women, I think, sometimes more clearly show the gaps in our institutions. Women probably act more frequently or interact more frequently, if you will, with public schools.
mm,
Studies have shown that women actually manage the access to health care in their families, and that those are studies
yeah,
that have been validated. So there you have women, interacting more with the healthcare system, either for themselves, but more often on behalf of their family. And then when you get into the faith aspects, oftentimes women are guiding the spiritual development of their children. Um, so that's interaction in lots of different spaces. And I didn't talk about women who may be in the legal profession or, medical profession or teaching. A lot of different careers out there, and women have at this point made their mark in all of them. Um, again, they're willing to say and willing to understand that, there may be gaps in these institutions, whereas I think men are seem to be, with sometimes a more narrow set of experiences and maybe not quite as willing all the time to peel back the onion and say the institutions need to work better, or the institutions need to be more integrated, or the institutions need to uh, accommodate different situations. You can't underestimate or undervalue that voice. And
yeah.
I will just say I do believe that women are more collaborative and again more focused on solving the problem and tend to be less focused on promoting their ego or their persona.
And so, what advice do you have for other women who are leaning into finding their voice, finding their power to be engaged in the community, whatever sector it is, about leaning into that feeling of there's something that I see here that isn't quite right, and I think I can make a difference about it. What advice do you have for folks as they engage in this journey?
Well, my advice would be to get involved in the space that you
Yeah.
care about, and to go in using your assets.
Yeah.
So, I, for example, folks have come to me saying, I really care about your child welfare legislation. I was really delighted that your kinship care program passed, and I want to help. I'm very good at communicating. I'm very good in the, communication space, and I really want to promote this bill. Do you mind if I use all these platforms, et cetera, et cetera? So again, that person is coming to the space that she cared about deeply and starting with her assets,
Yeah.
starting with her skill set, starting in her comfort zone. And then as you want to do more and more, you're going to learn other sets of skills so you can be more impactful in that same space. And people will respect that and help you and follow your lead, which is at the end of the day the kind of dynamic you need to create if you're going to run for elected office, and the trust that people have. When I first ran for office, people said, "Oh, I've worked with you and I really trust your judgment. Of course I would endorse you." And I think that's the kind of dynamic that you not the kind of yeah,
Yeah.
synergy that you have to create.
And that's so exciting that your leadership is inspiring others to find their voice and to lean into the things that they are passionate about. What else is giving you hope right now? Where are you seeing women or girls, really leaning into their ideas and, innovating and pushing boundaries to create lasting change? What gives you hope right now across the Commonwealth?
Well, the whole the whole issue on, women's reproductive rights
Yeah, big
has
one.
brought a lot of women to the table who in the past just didn't engage on politics. It was something that you was, not touching their day-to-day lives,
Yeah,
and they thought, life was gonna go on as they always knew it would go on. And then, of course, we had the Dobbs decision and the reversal of the Roe v. Wade constitutionally protected framework and a whole different, ballgame. And, we saw these southern states come up with pretty draconian rules. And, regardless of where you are on, the spectrum of whether, abortion should be accessible or not, regardless of where you are, the principle of having the government tell you what to do with your bodies. I mean, most people have to say, wait a minute, you know, I I'm part of the Bill of Rights too. And I should be able to control my body if I'm going to pursue life and liberty and happiness. There's something not quite uh, right about this, and
yeah.
and I think a lot of folks, have acknowledged that and are getting very involved in that whole conversation. I'm incredibly proud that, the Democratic majorities in the state Senate and the House of Delegates did pass the language putting a constitutional amendment before voters,
Very exciting. Yeah.
enshrining the right to reproductive health care services and, so that passed, and it needs to pass again in the 2026 session.
And that happened along with 2 other really
2
key
other yeah,
initiatives,
2 other
right?
constitutional amendments, right? We had language that would ensure, once felons serve their time and they are released, um, from incarceration, they, in fact, will have an automatic restoration of the very important right to vote. And then the other one had to do with marriage equality. So, just stating you can really marry who you love. And that is, all three of those really enshrine important rights that Virginians, I think all Virginians believe are personal, important, and should be protected in our Constitution. And each one of those constitutional amendment questions has to be voted on again by the House of Delegates and the state Senate. Has to pass twice. We'll have with an intervening election, which is this November 2025. So if they pass again in 2026, then those three questions will go before the voters in November of 2026.
What a powerful way to really have a voice as part of the Commonwealth. We as individual voters will get to vote on those. And thank you, Senator, for being part of the efforts, the leadership to really ensure that all three of those
And
questions about voting rights, about marriage equality, about reproductive health care in our bodies all are there potentially for us in the 2026 election if it passes again during the 2026 legislative session. Yeah, that's
that's right.
exciting.
Yeah. So it's, I just feel it's those questions are, those constitutional amendments would be landmark. Um, movements, if you will, and long time in coming. So, and there's no need for the governor to get involved in those issues. So, yeah, we're very, very excited. And we had female leadership on all three of those constitutional
Yeah,
amendments. And again, I, female lawmakers are very focused on problem solving and will do what it takes, even if their name is not first on the bill. They will, work hard with the stakeholder groups, work hard, promoting the information and the analysis and back those bills. And frequently, a lot of female lawmakers, their names are absolutely first on
yeah.
bills.
Well, and it's like we've been talking about when you want something done, you often go and ask a Virginia woman to do it.
Right, right. Aren't
We
we
get stuff
usually the
done.
busiest people in the
Yeah.
world, right? The moms, the
Yes.
ones with a career, the ones you always go to ask somebody who's already very busy. You're absolutely right. Yeah.
Well, and along with that, with asking a Virginia woman, we're also, I think, a really powerful group across, not just the Commonwealth, but the country and the world, is lifting up other women doing really phenomenal things, big and small, that are changing their community. So we love to always wrap up the show with our question about passing the mic. You work with and mentor so many inspiring women and girls. Is there one or two that you want to lift up and suggest we bring on to the Ask a Virginia Woman show? Somebody that you wanna pass the mic to, and any
Oh,
questions that you
there are
wanna make sure we ask them.
two women that come to mind. One is Delegate Adele McClure. She's a fairly
Yes.
new delegate, right?
Yeah.
And, she's got great experience. She was executive director of the Legislative Black Caucus. She's got a compelling personal story, and a younger woman, new mom.
Oh, wow, exciting.
So, and a lawmaker at the same time, so she'd be great. And then, there's a wonderful, woman on our school board in Arlington, and, Zariah Hadley
Mhm.
is her name, and, she's a Latina, and, uh just entered politics, but she does communications for a large Fortune 500 company. Um, and she does have a law degree, but she's delving into those very, personal and emotional issues that school board members deal with all the time. So she would have a very interesting perspective on how to lead in a time when folks are very divided. So, and you see the divisions most starkly in probably the local government levels and the
So
school board
true.
levels. Yeah,
Well, thank you so much, Senator Favola, for being with us here today and sharing your
thank you.
story. So much phenomenal wisdom and advice about leadership and just life in general, about how to show up and lean into our values. And one of the quotes that I really find inspiring, it's even hung up here on the wall behind my desk. It says, to inspire people, don't show them your superpower, show them theirs. And that's what you really, I think, embody is you have so many superpowers and you have spent a life full of public service. But what I see you doing every day is really showing others how they can lean into their voices and their ideas. And, you help them see their own superpower. So thanks for being a Virginia woman who is doing great things and inspiring us all. That is it for our episode today of Ask a Virginia Woman. And if you enjoyed today's conversation, folks, don't forget to subscribe and leave a review and share it with someone who needs to hear it. We're going to continue every week like to be asking big questions, and we invite you to keep listening and reflecting and engaging in what matters to you. If you want more stories like this, follow us on social media at VA Women and visit our websites, vawomen.org or vawomenvoices.org, to get involved, nominate a guest, or to support the show. And so until next time, stay bold, stay curious, and remember, when in doubt, just ask a Virginia woman.